everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
It's me, Jackie, not Perry Cruz. Jackie McDonald.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another show about goings-on in behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. And we're going to have a topic. We're going to talk about that topic. We're going to discuss it at length. But I got to be honest, we've done a lot of episodes of this show. We've done over 300. And it's like so many graphs and so many, pre and post test or statistics. And I'm tired of it. I want to talk about research where it's like a story. I just want to get like people's thoughts on the matter, but I want there to be like a scientific way to do that rather than just like, getting my uncle's right-wing Facebook page ideas and putting that as a paper, because I don't think that would count as a peer-reviewed method. I want something that's like a little bit more meaty from the qualitative side of things. I don't always need numbers because we're missing some information. And if you could do this, folks, I really would appreciate it if we could also talk about subjects that matter, like, job burnout, right? So if we could do that, that would be really, really awesome. And maybe, just maybe, we could find somebody else, because I'm kind of tired of talking to you two, like somebody brand new to join us.
Totally fair.
To do all of these things.
Oddly specific request you're making.
These things come in your head when you're recording your show and you say, I should have thought about this before I hit play.
Absolutely,
but fortunately,
you should have.
I should have done that. But maybe we'll get lucky, and when I introduce that magical fourth person,
behind curtain number
they'll
3?
be able to do all these things. And I hope so, because joining us today to talk about such a qualitative analysis of research related to burnout, specifically RBT burnout, we have special guest, Dr. Nicole Gravina. Nicole, can you make these magical podcast dreams come true?
I'll do my best.
Okay, good. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm joking, folks. We knew we were talking about the subject.
I think they knew that.
Did they get it?
I think they knew.
I'm worried someone's like listening in their car and they're like steering off the road. Like, how is this going to end? This podcast is out of contrwe Anywho, maybe we'll see. I don't know. Write in if you.
Exactly how it'll happen.
So, Nicole, thank you. We're going to be talking today about qualitative analyses in some depth, because it's not a method that I think we've talked about some thematic analyses. This felt, there's a lot more steps going on in the research that you're publishing with your co-authors. So really excited to hear about kind of some other directions we could take some of our research, especially in behavior analysis. Certainly always excited to talk about burnout, not because we're excited about the concept of burnout, but because it is such a reality that many people face. And so we've got a lot of fun things to talk about in our show today. But before we do that, would you mind just telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself and how you became interested in this topic?
Sure. So I'm an associate professor at University of Florida, and my background is organizational behavior management. And I've been doing this for a long time, probably about 20 years. I've been in academia, but I also spent about 5 years as a full-time consultant. And the topic of burnout has always kind of been in the back of my mind. Behavior analysts haven't tried to address it really, except for in the last couple of years. But I've done a lot of work in behavioral safety, and related to behavioral safety is occupational health, right? And so whenever you're digging into the literature and safety, you're also hearing people talk about occupational health. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And then also we've just seen people experience it, talking about it in our field. And so because of that background, I thought maybe this is an area that we could dive into and do more.
Excellent. Well, we have two really great studies that we'll be discussing at some length today. Diana, what will we be talking about with Dr. Gravina?
Yes, Dr. Gravina has provided us with 2 articles to review today, and they include a qualitative analysis of variables contributing to the registered behavior technicians' burnout and turnover in Florida. That was written by Nastasi, McGarry, Peters, Leon, Bacotti, and Gravina, and that was published in Behavior Analysis in Practice 2024. Also, Everybody Needs to Take Breaks, a qualitative analysis of registered behavior technicians' experiences with taking breaks at work by Nastasi, Green, Tay, and Gravina, and published in Behavior Analysis in Practice, also 2024. What a great year.
It's a theme issue.
And there is a little typo in that first title, and I sent you the old version of it, but it's corrected now. So the should not be in there, but that's okay.
Okay.
I didn't even notice it.
It's okay.
I just
All
flowed
part of
right
the
by it. So I
Fun
think
publishing process.
yeah, right.
And Nicole, kudos for using a quote in the title. I am a huge fan of when titles are not just the description of the thing that we are about to talk about related to this concept or this theme. I love the quotes.
It's very common in qualitative analysis to do that, actually.
There you go.
Got a quote and a colon. So it's like double points for me.
You gotta have
I
both.
also appreciate a colon. And it's in quotes, quotation marks as well. And it's kind of like letting you know it's going to be a qualitative analysis because, like you said, very often those will start with quotes. So it's like a meta reference. Yeah. That's all we do actually on the show is just critique titles.
I mean, it's a big
journal titles.
I mean,
we're not very good at titles in our field, though.
Well, who hasn't looked through? I got the new job. Let me look through the content. Oh, these titles are boring. No thanks. See you next quarter. No, I'm not doing this. Gotta have a good title. So, Nicole, this was a series of articles, or at least a series of research, kind of part of a bigger research that you and your team were doing just on the concept, on the actual, the RBT turnover rates in Florida. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to choose such a wide-ranging topic and then it kind of narrowed down into these articles?
Yeah. So one of the articles was actually sponsored by a grant. The Florida Developmental Disabilities Council had given us a grant to look at the RBT shortage in Florida. So as part of that grant, we did some qualitative work, we did some survey work, we looked at, already existing data available. And so that gave us a big opportunity to do some of this work and look at it in many different directions. The other study that is related to breaks actually came about a little differently, and we did that one first. That one was based on a study that we had already done that was a quantitative study in the lab where we looked at the relationship between taking breaks and productivity. And then after we did that, we were trying to think of what the next step study should be, and everything that we were coming up with didn't feel quite right to us. It was like, we're going to give people breaks so that we can make them more productive, right? And so that didn't feel very good to us. And so then as we were thinking about what should we do for our next step study, we were like, maybe we should ask people what we should do. And so we, at first, were thinking about doing this informally. And in OBM, we do a lot of asking people stuff, right? We send out surveys with open-ended questions. We interview people. Like, this is how we get to what our pinpoint will be or what our intervention will be. But we've never done it in such a formal way. And so at the time, we had just, at the University of Florida, we had just hired a colleague in counseling psychology who does a bunch of qualitative research. And so we were seeing all of their research come in, and we were like, hey, maybe we could ask people and we could do it in this more systematic, qualitative way. And so we sort of learned from our colleagues around us about this process and thought we could apply it here.
All right. So when we talk about doing a qualitative analysis, I think for a lot of folks, it's probably not something they maybe studied as much, or when they were looking at grad school papers to kind of go through the task list that really came up, if at all. Do you mind just sort of giving a quick elevator pitch as to what exactly is a qualitative analysis when it comes to research?
Yeah, so I will do my best with this. I feel like I am, as a disclaimer, I'm still learning about qualitative analysis, so I am not an expert in it. I'm learning in this area, but the way that I would describe it is that you interview people to understand their experiences and then apply a coding process to come up with themes that highlight their experiences that are common, but also notice the things that are different so you can show the variety of those experiences, if that makes sense. The idea is to learn from people who are living in whatever that experience is, and that will hopefully inform our next steps going forward.
Okay. And you mentioned that one of the newer team members had a background in psychology. Was it consulting psychology you said, or it was
counseling psychology?
Counseling psychology. When working with this person to sort of develop the qualitative analysis that you would do for the RBT burnout and break studies, is there a difference in how qualitative analysis would work, say, in psychology according to that individual, or an OBM versus in, how it's used here for behavior analytic purposes? Or is it sort of like one size fits all kind of, it looks the same no matter where you are?
No, it's very different, and people use it very differently. Because we are behavior analysts, we are actually using a fairly straightforward approach, because in a lot of psychology, what they'll do as they create these themes is then try to fit them into a framework or come up with a model or make some inferences around what people have said. As behavior analysts, we felt like that was going too far away from the data. And so we were really just more descriptive in the way that we presented the information. And so we struggled with that a bit as we would talk to people who were supporting us and learning how to do this process of figuring out, like, what can we do that still feels like we're behavior analysts, right? But we're applying this methodology.
Okay. So there's something I always think of when I see qualitative analysis, and I see it in a lot of papers. I think one of the papers, I can't remember which one of the papers sort of even hinted at this a little bit, of the idea of, could qualitative analysis sort of be like the introduction paper of like, it's like your starter home, like, don't get too attached to this one. It's not that important, because the real work, the quantitative research that stems from this is what's going to be important. Had you ever thought of it that way? Or is that something that came up? Because then it does sort of makes it feel like, well, why would I read this paper? I'll wait for the sequel. That's going to be the good one, with the numbers in it.
Yeah, I think that is how I always kind of thought of it. And even as we were going into this paper, that was sort of how we thought of it. Like, we weren't sure what direction to go with the breaks paper. And so we were like, well, let's ask people what they, need and what they're worried about in their jobs, and then we'll go from there. But I do think that qualitative research is meant to be important as a standalone style of research to really capture what people are experiencing in the moment, right? And so, yes, it can inform our future research, but like, we want to know what, it's much more nuanced and contextualized than our more quantitative approaches.
To me, if you unearth a skeleton, right?
You're consulting with an archaeologist for this study?
I'm an archaeologist. So if you find yourself a skeleton, you can learn some things about the person, like their height and their,
teeth.
Gender and genetic things, right? And something.
We love their teeth.
Something about their teeth, perhaps, right? But there's other things you will not be able to figure out about that person, like their skin color and their hair color and their eye color and additional factors, right? So to me, the hard data that are observable in the way that we like to talk about observable data are the things that you can uncover with the skeleton. But if you want a fuller and richer picture, you are going to be missing some of those details. So the qualitative data are the equivalent of what those additional components would provide to you.
Like the pottery shards you find near your skeleton.
Maybe. Those are some outline data, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in some of the burnout data too, because if you look at it, they look at things like your pay and how that's related to burnout or turnover, right? But then when you are actually able to talk to the participants and they tell you things like, when client cancels, I can't get paid, and there's a lot of variability in my pay, you just get a better picture of what the challenges are. So we already had some data around this, but I think it added some meat to it.
Mm.
To the skeleton?
Yes. I'm still going with that reference.
That metaphor is going to stick. We got to stay with it.
Muscles and tendons.
So, Nicole, when you're developing the kind of the overall quantitative analysis, it seems like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because as much as it was gracious of you to explain how you're still in a learning process with the use of it, we're like 70 steps back from that learning process. So if we say anything wrong, please feel free to correct us. You've got interviews, whether focus groups or individually. You're interviewing to the point of saturation, which I kind of want to talk a little bit more about that. And then you do some sort of thematic analysis. And there's some different terms or different types of thematic analyses. Kind of going from beginning to end. When you're creating your interviews, is it different than, say, a survey or creating a survey in terms of an interview? Or is it a similar process, just more with a different outcome? Like, you're not looking for the numbers that came from your survey.
Yeah, so we're not like counting up the number of responses. And that was actually something the reviewers asked us to do several times. And so we had to like push back and say like, no, that's not what we're doing here. But when we're structuring the survey, we're trying to make sure that we're asking questions that are open enough that we're going to give people leeway to be able to give us information maybe we haven't even thought of. We also add in probing questions. So like if we think, well, maybe they'll talk about this, or maybe we want them to talk about this, we'll add those things in. When we write the survey, we try really hard not to lead them in any direction. And that was something that we iterated with the interview. We iterated the interview questions several times to make sure we weren't leading them in any way. I think it's just meant to like give them enough space to give us this detail.
Okay. But that must be very challenging because, like you said, you don't want to lead them on. You don't want to be, so breaks are good, right? Because that's going to give you a set of answers. But you can't make the questions too closed-ended because if they're giving you 1, 2-word answers, you might as well have done a survey with the amount of time it probably takes to schedule the interviews and everything.
We piloted the questions with a few different people and tried out different questions to see, did it give them enough information that they knew what we were asking without giving them too much information that we were leading them.
Was there anything you were looking for to know you'd hit that sweet spot, like an amount of time people seemed to talk or the types of answers they would give, or it was just more of a feel of like that felt like we got meaningful information from an individual? They seemed comfortable.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think like that question that you asked sounds very much like a question a behavior analyst would ask. And that was something we were constantly struggling with as we went through. We would go and ask the qualitative researchers, like, what about this? And then they would say like, no, you shouldn't care about that.
Your thematic analysis would be so easy afterwards. Negative statements. Yep, that's all of them. Great.
Yeah. Well, what about on the informed consent document? So when you're doing the research, like how do you write it so it's not leading? Right? Like we want to find out about breaks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the breaks one were kind of leading. That was sort of leading, just in that they knew we were talking about breaks, so they probably assumed that we had some kind of value statement around that, right? But as best as we could, we were trying not to lead their thoughts on it.
So process-wise, you pilot your questions, you've got your questions, you're sort of untraining some of your behavior analytic question-making skills, and
you're adding to them.
Adding to them. There you go. And then you need to just interview people until you reach, and this was such an interesting idea, the idea of saturation, because I've always wondered that myself of, usually you think of statistics, well, you have to have this many if you want to have this statistical analysis have any power. But with the idea of saturation, to some extent, it sounded like we got bored of listening to people's answers, or they just kept giving the same answers. I'm oversimplifying, I know, but like, what are you looking for when you talk about saturation? Like knowing you're done.
Yeah, so this was another place where the reviewers were like, "Hey, can you give us a more concrete kind of, criteria of which saturation was reached?" And no, it is basically that you're interviewing people, and then when you go to code the data, there are no new themes that emerge, no new kind of information that emerges. And there's a lot of research on saturation in the qualitative methodology literature that suggests, around this number of participants and around this number of interviews is what you need to reach saturation. So we were paying attention to that because we were new to it. And so we were still trying to figure out what that would look like. But for us, I think we were trying to overshoot it a little bit and make sure like we really, really have reached saturation as we were interviewing people, but there isn't like a clear criteria around that.
Okay. So it's more just as you're going through your coding, it just feels like I could have coded this in 5 seconds because nothing different
Nothing
came out
new
of
has
it.
appeared, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But I would think it's also really critical then to ensure that you're getting a wide range of respondents as well across all different capacities.
Yeah, so for both of these studies, we tried to make sure we had people who are in clinics and schools, who worked in homes. So we tried to get a little bit of variety. And we also didn't have people included that worked in the same organization because, we're talking about burnout. We wanted a variety of organizations represented. But at the same time, it's important to note that the qualitative research were representing just what the people in the study said. So I think that sometimes people try to generalize it, like all RBTs think this, but really what you're supposed to be thinking with this research is these RBTs said this and thought this,
I I'm always curious with, we've done a few papers that have sort of looked at some amount of qualitative analysis, more the thematic analysis piece. Is there a difference in how you would now do your thematic analysis for these papers because you're using an overall qualitative analytic procedure than like other types of thematic analysis? Like you mentioned, it's a little different from field to field. It really was like coding it. You used a software. I'm guessing it was like a summarizing software, sort of summarize the results, or it was more looking for keywords, or...
So the software actually, there are some tools in the software that will do some analysis for you, but we didn't use them. We wanted to make sure we were looking through all of the data. And so what you can do is flag statements in the software and then tag it with a theme. And initially you could tag your own themes and say, like, I think this is about this, and I think this is about that. And then eventually you might say, well, these two themes kind of sit together, so I'm going to call them this. And so you just go through and start tagging the statements for themes and then see how they hang together.
Okay. And you had a team, so because that process just sounds so deceptively, it sounds interesting, but it also sounds like so subjective. Like you could just be going forever if you and a colleague are disagreeing on what the theme means or doesn't mean. I mean, is that just more of my not understanding the process that is giving me that fear, or did that ever happen?
No, I think that if you were to listen to the interviews, like the themes just emerge for you. I mean, I felt like we knew what they were before we were even going through and using the process. Maybe with something that people are less likely to say the same thing, then it would be feel more subjective. But I think that people were saying very similar things. And so you kind of already knew what they were going to be.
So qualitative analysis of like, well, what do you think about the state of American politics? Like you might never finish that study because you're just never going to run out of new themes.
Yeah. Yeah. You'd probably have to narrow your population for something like that.
Okay.
So it could either be based on like words that they included themselves in their statements, or sort of you as the researcher providing a summary of the main points and then
like every time that they talked about pay, we would flag, this is about pay, right? And then once we had all the pay ones together, we could look for sub-themes in those.
Got it.
Okay.
I thought the name of this software was hilarious, the Deduce.
Deduce, yeah.
But it's like DEDOOSE. I don't know.
Oh my, I just got it. I didn't get it when I read it. I didn't get it when I was taking notes. I just did like the action to deduce.
Yes.
Woo! Just
I don't know. That one maybe could have gone around the table one more time, but that's just me. But hopefully it was a useful software.
They want to market it. They got to take out all the vowels, so it's like deduce. Looks fancy.
Hi. Do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. Sorry to interrupt our discussion with Dr. Gravina, but I want to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening, you can earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to the website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast player to go directly to this episode page and put in some key information. including 2 secret code words. These are secret code words from our guest. I'll give you the first one now, and it is Teddy, Teddy. Is it the bear, you say? Or that peanut butter that everyone likes, the all-natural one? Or is it the old president, Roosevelt? It's none of these. It's actually one of Dr. Gravina's cats, Teddy. All right, and now back to the show. All right, so I know another section that we reread in the papers were, I think it was a role of the researchers in one of the papers and the researcher reflexivity section in another. Was that something that was of interest to you and your co-authors because this was a qualitative analysis, because it was a little bit of a different research for something like BAP? Or was it more of kind of a viewpoint of trying to just include more information about the authorship, therefore how your opinions might play into the thematic analysis, something else?
It's really common in qualitative research to include a section like that. And it's because what you're just talking about, that there's some subjectivity in the coding, right? And so what we're doing is admitting, like, this is my perspective. I'm a behavior analyst. I do OBM. And so I am bringing that perspective into the coding process. And so in qualitative research, they admit that there's both, the participant's perspective, but also the researcher's perspective. I think that's true in our quantitative research as well, but we like to kind of think of it as being fully objective, right? But we're still bringing in our own thoughts and opinions and experiences to the measures that we choose and who we choose to do research with, etc.
Yeah.
I loved that it had those full descriptions of every author and each of your backgrounds and identities
I like that
and
too.
experience. That was great. I've seen more of that lately in our own field as well, because I think it is, a false understanding that we can ever be completely objective and separate from the work that we're doing in our interpretation, at least in some level of the data. So I really appreciated that. I'd like to see that more.
I also like it because then it makes me feel like I'm more friends with everyone because I know more about them, right? So, and I like that. So when I read, I'm like, of course they said that because,
Yeah.
I like thinking that when I'm reading articles, like, oh yeah, I can see why they would say this based on where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's
and if people outside of our field read it, then knowing that we're behavior analysts, I think, is a really important perspective for them to bring into this, because even though it feels more subjective to us, our approach to it was still fairly objective, right? We still brought in that lens. And so I think it's important for people to know that.
When you're counseling or was counseling psychology, when they read the manuscript, were they like, oh, behavior analyst? Could they feel
It's so cute how you're trying to do that.
Or were they impressed with what you did?
I would always say neither. I think that because there is such a wide variety in how people do qualitative analysis, it was sort of this works, and it's who you are. And so this is perfect.
I love that. That's nice. They're this is who you are. That's so good.
I like that.
So, Nicole, did anything change? You mentioned that you and some of your colleagues were getting really used to the qualitative analysis procedure to begin with, and you're working with folks still learning about it. Did anything change as you were moving between these two studies in terms of how you did the analysis? Was it more just a matter of efficiency? Anything about design that you were focused on in one study versus the other?
We definitely got more efficient over time. And I think as we go forward and we do more qualitative work, I'm not even sure I'll use the software. Some of my friends that do qualitative research use Excel, and I'm so comfortable and familiar with Excel that I might switch to doing something like that because the software was very complicated. But other than that, I think we just got faster at it and maybe second-guessed ourselves less.
That's still got to be a good feeling, though, to feel, speed up a process.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so thank you for sharing more about the background information of.
Let's crunch those numbers.
But let's talk about the studies themselves. The goal was to look at factors people brought up related to turnover or intention to turnover, as well as opinions of breaks and whether they were or were not helpful in reducing job burnout. If we could start with, I think we could start with breaks first, because you said that was the first study that you did. And so you were looking at that based on previous research on breaks, I think you'd mentioned, or some other research in OBM about whether breaks were or were not effective at reducing burnout or negative feelings?
Yeah, so this study was actually part of Jess Nastasi's dissertation. And Jess's first study was a study where it was a quantitative study where we looked at the relationship between breaks and productivity, and we had cumulative records, and it was, as
Wow.
behavior analysis as you can get. And we showed that most people were more productive when they took breaks than when they weren't taking breaks. And so after that, we had thought about doing some applied research, and we were looking at doing the work with RBTs. And so we were thinking, can we add RBTs to their day and look at things like or add breaks to their day, and then look at things like treatment integrity. And we ran into a couple of issues. One was that some organizations were sort of resistant to the idea, if we add more breaks in, then what? They're going to want that forever, even if they're more productive or their treatment integrity is higher. Boy. And then also, we didn't want to do it for the purpose of making them more productive or better workers, because, breaks are important for the sake of breaks. And so we were thinking, let's go out and talk to people about why we should be taking breaks and why it would be important in the context of RBTs, and even ask them if they're getting opportunities to take breaks, because as you see from the research, not everybody gets that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I like that thought process, because I'll be honest, last year professionally was probably the closest I came to just full burnout in the field. And if I had to go to one more talk where people told me, hey, burnout is real and here's what you should do, and just feel like I was like, I understand all of these things I'm supposed to do, I can't do any of them, there's 50,000 factors working against me, I'm now more burnt out after listening to your How to Fight Burnout speech. It was very frustrating. So I love that thought of, why not talk to folks about the breaks and then get more information about breaks in context, as opposed to just, because you already done the research, or at least Jess had done the research to say breaks are good. You could just build off of that, or do your parametric break analysis of like, you get 5 minutes today, tomorrow you're going to get 10, and then 15, and we're going to see which ones are your best days.
What not come back?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were also like, what should people do on their breaks? And then we were like, well, we don't want to tell people what to do on their breaks. We're like, if you do this, it'll be more restorative than if you do this other thing. But then we thought we should just ask them what they like to do on their breaks to learn more about that,
That's smart.
I really love that your team's focus was not on worker efficiency as it related to break, but to the human who was there providing the work and what they needed to, feel, like you said, restored and not burned out. I just absolutely love that was where everybody went with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it gave them a voice in a way that they haven't always had a voice in our field and in our research.
Yes.
So that felt really good.
Yeah. So I know there were a lot of themes came up in the paper on breaks, but do you mind sharing some of the more salient, well, at least in your opinion, more memorable, perhaps is a better term, themes that came out of the study?
Yeah. So, we found that not everybody gets the opportunity to take breaks, that they're not always formally embedded, and it can be more difficult for people who work in home, and it can be really dependent on the caregivers and whether or not they kind of note that you might need a break or could tell that you'd need a break. And also people who work in home and are driving from place to place. Sometimes the drive can be a break, but it might not always feel like it. And just
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. I know that
not a
counts
break.
in Massachusetts, and there are probably varying state laws regarding this. Am I correct in that?
You are right.
Yeah. There are state laws about breaks, but I think that they could be stronger. I can't remember the details of them, but they're more focused on like the lunch break than actually getting more breaks. And when you think about the RBT job, there's a lot of hypervigilance involved, right? Like you need to talk a certain way and do a certain thing, have your body a certain way, and just be like working all the time in a way that's not true in most jobs, right? You don't have to think about every aspect of your behavior in most jobs. And so I think probably they need more breaks than in a typical job.
I think that an accountant probably doesn't fall asleep thinking that they've lost a child, right? Because they haven't looked for their kid, right? They're not like, where's that spreadsheet?
Oh, like that's their nightmare?
Yeah.
You mean?
Right?
Becky?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a high stress job in that
I
sense.
can't tell you how.
Can't ever let your guard down.
I can't tell you how many. Anytime I'm going to be working with kids, the night before, I always have I lost the kid dream, because it's so stressful.
Yeah. I haven't
Right?
had one in a while, but I never liked those. Like, where'd they go?
No,
I
they're
can't
the
find
worst.
them.
But I doubt that like other jobs have those types of like panic moments where you've lost someone else's kid.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, it's a high stress job. I think it's also stressful when kids might engage in, or the client might engage in challenging behavior. And so some people talked about needing more breaks during challenging behavior or after challenging behavior, just having an opportunity to reset so that they're fresh and ready for the next part of the session. Let's see, other themes that emerged. There was varying support around from supervisors and from the organization for taking breaks. It sounded like a lot of people felt like their peers would help them if they were around and noticed they needed a break, then they would say, let me tag you out. But in some cases, BCBAs would say things like, are you sure you have enough time? Do you need a break right now? And that was great. But there were other times when they were like, if you need a break right now, then you're not very good at this job.
Oh.
And so, it's just highly variable. And I think that our field could do a better job if supervisors thought about giving people breaks.
Mm-hmm. That theme really jumped out at me because I still remember, like, fresh out of college doing this work, there was the mindset of everyone of like, we got to be tough, like we got to deal with this, like we're the only ones who can handle these crises, like we're so important. And that got tiresome after a while. But I'm guessing the people who got slightly tired of it were the ones who then moved on to be like, well, I'll do more clinical, where I'm more a clinical director now. I just don't have to do the hands-on. I'm not on the floor as much. And then the other groups quit because they said, I don't like this. I'm not enjoying this. I'm not helping anybody because I'm just constantly miserable. And never really thought about why. Just like, well, they just didn't like the field. Or they just weren't moving up as fast as I did. And really never putting it together of like, no, that mindset was kind of poisonous both for you and for your coworkers of not being supportive that way.
Yeah. In the paper, we talk about the therapist mindset. And I think that's true in other areas of psychology too. Think about the people that come into a clinical role like this. Most of us are like helpers and we're givers and we're people pleasers, right? And so we will do whatever we can to help other people and sometimes to our own detriment. And so we need other people around us to create some structure so that we can make sure we're taking care of ourselves and taking, some time to restore and take a break.
Yes. In terms of the thematic analysis and just sort of having so many different people share their views, were there any interesting themes related to that content of a break? Because when I was reading that section, I was thinking about various breaks I've taken, like when I would take a break, like when I was still teaching a lot, what did my lunch break look like now versus what it looks like then versus what it looks like now? I know there's some things like touching grass seemed to be, a couple people mentioned they just wanted to be outside, but were there sort of like good break practices of like, these seemed to sound the most refreshing and restorative?
Yeah, some people said they like to get outside and get in nature. What was interesting is that there was some conflicting information. Like one person said they like to talk to their coworkers and debrief or vent, and somebody else said that they don't want to talk to their coworkers at all about work during their breaks, and so they try to take their break alone. And so I think there's probably varying preferences that people have of what's helpful during breaks. Before we had done this study, we were thinking a lot about what people do during breaks and whether or not that matters. And I still think that's an opportunity for us to like help people think through what could they do that would be restorative, So another thing that people did was look at social media, and social media might be restorative. And I think in some cases it is, but it could also be problematic, right? It could make you more stressed out during your break. And so I think if we had more information around what people could do during their break to feel more restored, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I love that idea too, because I know that when I never got breaks as what would be classified as an RBT, really. I always, they were like couched at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, which isn't really a break, right? Because you haven't actually started your day yet. But I have some students that I supervise now, and when I'm like, take a break, they have no idea what to do on their break. They're like, I can do work. And I'm like, no, don't do work. This is your break from work. And they're like, but what do I do? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what you do. So I think maybe, it would be interesting to think about the different ways that people could take a break and like provide preference assessments. And, then we could have like in an RBT break room, have like a things you can do on your break list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that would be neat.
Well, even in classrooms, teachers will build in breaks into the classroom, and those could vary. Like sometimes they're like, they call them bio breaks, which just means you get to go to the bathroom, right? Or like a gross motor break, so they encourage everyone to get up and walk around. Or there might be like a meditation type break where everyone practices breathing, etc. So it's, who knows, right? Like any of those may sort of, scratch a certain EO itch at a given point in time, and it's going to vary for everyone. But I like the idea that there are probably different types of breaks that serve different needs, and individuals, need for that particular type of break is also likely idiosyncratic, depending on what this type of work takes out of them.
Yeah, that came up in the research too, where people said that sometimes like creating materials or graphing or writing session notes might actually function as a break for them. So, yeah.
If you love Excel as much as we do.
That's right.
Like, finally, I'm here, Excel.
Give me that data.
So Nicole, moving on to the other study looking at turnover. I think that's I guess that was the question, probably the $1 million question. I don't know what the value was, but from the grant of why is everyone quitting, or why is the turnover rate so rough when it comes to human services, specifically to RBTs in Florida in this case? And I'm guessing you found the one variable that did it, and now it's all they turn the switch and it's all good now, right?
That's
right. I wish. This was just one piece of the puzzle of that grant. And so we wrote a big report about that grant too. Mm-hmm. And one of the directions that we took after the grant was actually helping support people in managing challenging behavior and crisis management more. So that's sort of a direction that we're going in now. I do think that was a big part of it, is that people don't get enough training and enough support around that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the just the level of intensity of crises and challenges related to different behaviors that were seen on the job was kind of a big barrier to staying in the position.
I think it's a mismatch between your training and what you're managing day to day. I think if people are well trained and then the resources they need, then they can manage it pretty well. But if we're not training people and kind of throwing them into new situations and they don't have the support they need, then that's a struggle.
I'm thinking too, there's a intent to turnover survey that Ellie Kazemi did in 2015, and they surveyed those 96 behavior technicians. It's weird that I remember that I was 96 technician. But right, and they in that they said, it's not necessarily correlative that the prediction to turnover would be with the client characteristics, right? That a high support client would automatically guarantee that everybody wanted to quit, but it was like the training and supervision that was really more telling. Mm-hmm. And look at that. You seamlessly put the qualitative and quantitative behavior, the analysis together in that nice way.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, one of the other themes that came up was one of just this job is either not appreciated enough, not known enough, or it's just not a job to stay in for, extended period of time. Was that surprising to you when you started hearing people say, like, no, this job's just not for people to stay in for more than a couple of years? Or were you sort of expecting it based on previous research?
Yeah, I think I was expecting it. I think it was interesting to hear that people called it a transient career. So they just didn't see it as like a place that there were ways to move up. I think that's an opportunity in our field too, that, when people have a lot of experience as an RBT, we should be able to put them in a position that's a little higher level, more responsibility, more recognition for their skill set, right? And because of the way that our billing is set up, we really don't have a lot of great mechanisms to do that, but it stinks that it's our billing that's dictating how we're recognizing good performance rather than, their actual performance.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you had some good ideas from, you and
some good ideas.
Your co-authors near the end of the discussion section to that point
good ideas.
Of, I didn't quantify, I didn't count how many ideas there were, folks. That's all. So, things like being on committees or things that just would not count as billable hours, but that would potentially give, an individual the sense that they're a part of something bigger than just their day-to-day, or that their opinion is of value. Were there any sort of ideas that came from the analyses themselves that, when folks were just doing the interviews that you said, well, that is a great idea. I got to write that one down. Like anything that jumped out is just like so trenchant.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the ideas came from the participants. It wasn't just they gave us the problems and then we were like, here's the magic solutions, right? Like they were telling us.
I love that in an
things.
interview where you're like, I'm going to stop you, tell you, here's a great idea.
Yeah, we were trying to capture what their ideas were, right? And I think just getting regular recognition, it was a lot about training, a lot about good supervision. They wanted to feel like they were really good at their job. And then, there's this great study by Eli Newcomb and Byron Wines on it, where they had a badge system that essentially just recognized that people had, met certain competencies and had recognized their skill set. And when they put this in place, they had a reduction in turnover. It was a case study, but I think even simple things like that could be useful in helping people see that we can see how good they are and we recognize that.
It's interesting. Pay came up, but wasn't necessarily as important as, either previous research or I think some fields say pay is number one.
Yeah. So I think in Ellie Kazemi's paper, I think it was satisfaction with pay and not actual pay that mattered. I think that's pretty consistent in some of the IO psychology research as well. What we heard is that people were initially attracted to the job because of their pay. Because, if you're starting an entry-level job that doesn't require a degree, then the pay is actually quite good. But then the work is hard, right? Yeah. And so then over time, the hard work, it's harder than some of those other jobs that might have a little less pay. But also, depending on how the organization pays, sometimes the pay isn't very consistent. If the client cancels, if there aren't enough clients, then it was the variability in pay that seemed to really matter to people. And then they also talked about benefits and kind of the trade-off where you might get a little less pay, but then you might get benefits with it. And so initially they're kind of attracted to this higher pay, but then they realized that health insurance would be nice and retirement would be nice. And, it's hard to see yourself as a career that you can't build retirement, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when I've spoken to students, it's, when the companies offer them those huge bonuses for coming, but then it's contingent on billable hours, which are you actually can't get those billable hours.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like, oh, this is not like super high paying, but I'm going to start and then I'm going to get this bonus that's going to make it really high paying, but nobody ever actually gets it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then it's doubly disappointing.
Yes.
As well.
Right. And then you're
because
just
then
super
it feels like
frustrated.
something, that you were promised and now you can't access, and you're feeling undervalued on top of it, and you're stressed out because you didn't get to take a break. All of these are really big problems. And, I think that these themes are emerging, and almost anyone who's supervising staff and has had high staff turnover could tell you most of these themes as well, right? Because we're hearing them again and again in varying capacities when we talk about burnout. The fact that our field has such a challenge right now of getting direct care support staff isn't necessarily surprising. I think, like we just said, because of the nature of the job, it can be really challenging and hard to sustain. But these are other organizational issues that we could be addressing via supervisory practices and support that we're providing to staff. And if we're not doing that, then it's absolutely going to be the case that we have these high levels of turnover. And it's to everyone's detriment, as I know you know too, right? You spend a long time training staff. It's not an easy job. And when staff leave, that hurts the clients, it hurts the organization as a whole, and it's a lot of time wasted that could have been better supporting the care and the quality of life for our clients. And that is a lose-lose for everybody.
Absolutely.
So, Nicole, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more detail about what kind of action steps came from some of these interviews, as well as a lot of the other work that you and your team had been doing. Because, when I hear people want to feel trained in these challenging situations, that's such a vague goal of like, okay, well, does that mean like they're great at the, they passed the procedural integrity test I gave them, or I did behavior skills training in these 3 skills, and I think these are good skills. Therefore, once they master that, that's probably enough. I know some of the folks in the interviews mentioned they want to know more about just the ethics of intrusive care. So, is that like an in-service? So how did you take this information and then think, all right, here are the next action steps to actually reach that goal of giving them that initial training in a way that's maybe scalable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of research in occupational health that shows that really good onboarding reduces burnout and turnover later. And so I think that our field can do a much better job with the onboarding process. You can see in a lot of the participants' responses, they said that they took the 40-hour training and then they were thrown right in. But I think we also have to think about the fact that our RBTs are working with lots of different clients who need different things. And so there's almost like this need to onboard for every single client that they have, right? And so I think our ABA organizations could be doing more in the onboarding process and then new client onboarding process and then just ongoing training, right? As far as our grant goes, one of the things, this grant, I should shout out Carrie Peters and Yanni Leon. They're both on the grant with me. And as far as the grant goes, we have been working on creating training for BCBAs mostly for BCBAs who've already been in the field for a year or two to learn more about challenging behavior and how to support their team who is working directly with their clients. And so we're trying to put out free resources for people so that we can upskill our workforce. That's maybe one solution, but I also think that organizations need to do a lot more. Like our whole field has many, many different ways that we could tackle this, right?
Oh, gee. Yeah. And I think that's going to vary so much based on home-based versus school-based versus center-based, because just there's so many barriers that go into the train, like who's in charge of what? Who does everyone need to do onboarding? Is it just one person? Is it just the direct supervisor? And what if that relationship doesn't exist? Is there another way to get the same results? There's a lot of questions. And it is funny, it's one of those topics I think about onboarding a lot, but I don't think until kind of having this conversation today, we realized, oh yeah, there are a lot of factors, kind of always assuming like, no, like there's a checklist somewhere. I just, I got to write it down. So, but there are so many small factors, and some of them might be a little idiosyncratic based on the groups that you're working with, the challenges they're going to face. So there's a lot there. Ooh. Well, I'd love to hear, I think, we've kind of gone over the research, some of the big themes. So it seems like a good time to move into our dissemination station section of the show. Where we sort of sum everything up and talk some next steps. And Nicole, you already shared some next steps in terms of some of the next level trainings and supports that you're exploring, seeing how they work, how well received they are, how much they support, kind of the onboarding process is supportive. But I'd love to hear a little bit more too about is all these adventures in qualitative analysis. Is this something that you're just going to keep on doing, that your lab is saying, yep, this is a big focus of our research going forward? Or was it kind of a fun vacation from the numbers and you're going back to numbers though?
I think that, so as far as next steps go, I think that we will continue to try to do work in this area of helping organizations learn more about what they can do to reduce burnout. And we'll do this in many different ways, right? Through workshops, through research. That's definitely a focus for me. As far as the qualitative research, I think that my lab will continue to do it. It won't be our central focus. But as I mentioned, I've already done a lot of qualitative research and qualitative work in a more informal way. Every time I've had a consulting client, I sent them a survey, I have interviewed people. And so I see this as a way to do a better job with that. And I also think that qualitative research is bringing in new and interesting information, and it's a good way for us to do social validity. What I hope is that our field will start doing something that looks a little more like this when we do our social validity assessments at the end of our research. And so I think my lab will continue doing this, maybe not as a central focus, but as a way to keep contextualizing the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I love that idea. Just kind of having it as part of that social validity piece, just checking in throughout, making sure you're on the right track with the population you're studying. I think that's fascinating, and it's really nice to hear you've had so many other positive experiences with it leading up to these papers and through these papers.
Yeah. And I think in social validity, we tend to just send out surveys and it's like 1 to 5, did you like the intervention, right? And we learn nothing from that. And a lot of times we give it to the person while we're standing there, right? And so there's some like social contingencies around that. Like, yes, I do like it and I want you to like me. And so I'm going to say 5 or whatever. You know, I don't think we learn anything from those kinds of rating scales. And so I think we could do a better job of saying, how could we do this better and getting really good information about that.
And I know you're focused on, the turnover and on onboarding and on burnout. But are there any other kind of pressing questions, maybe questions that you want other labs, because you're already got your hands full, to answer, and you think qualitative analysis would be an interesting inroads into some, initial answers? So sky's the limit on your question type.
Yeah, I actually think qualitative analysis would be really helpful with parents as well. I think that there's more we could do to support parents. And so I think people should start bringing that in. And also we could do qualitative analysis for things like pediatric feeding, maybe some places in our field where there's a little resistance. Because I think if we can capture the voices of the people who are actually experiencing that stuff or their caregivers, then maybe we could paint a wider picture for people outside of our field about what their actual experience is with some of that stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just agreeing.
Okay. That was like there was a question coming up. The theme of your was agreement.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm getting it. I gotta read some more of this stuff. Well, Dr. Nicole Gravina, thank you so much for being on the show today. It is always awesome to look at other types of research that we can bring into the field of behavior analysis, especially one like qualitative analysis that can give us so much rich information, perhaps a great way to push aside the Likert scales of social validity of the past. I love hearing that. And certainly the topic of burnout is always on everyone's mind. Anyone who works with frontline staff or direct care staff, just knowing how hard that job is and getting to hear from them in at least this group of RBTs and sort of some of their thoughts to kind of bring to their own practice. So it's very, very great having you on. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
If folks do want to reach out to either ask about this study or your lab work and or just kind of some general qualitative analysis do's and don'ts that you've learned over the years, is there a place that they can find you online?
Yes. So I have a Facebook page. My lab has an Instagram page. One of my students manages it. I don't know if I can even get to it, but they can find us there and contact us. And I also have a landing page at UF, so they can find me in all those places.
Oh, great. Awesome. We'll link those in the show notes too.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much again to Dr. Nicole Gravina for joining us to talk about qualitative analyses and the challenges with burnout and turnover in the RBT field, at least, as you would say, specifically in the group that was interviewed here. But I think there were some themes that resonated probably with many of us across the globe here, even though some of the research might not say you have total actionable effects. I think we all have a couple things we're thinking of. All right, what am I adding in regarding my breaks? And what am I adding in regarding my onboarding process? Or at least I hope you are. And if not, please check your podcast links. We're going to have links to Dr. Gravina's lab page, so you can go check that out and maybe ask her some questions yourself. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time and listening. But before we wrap up, we want to make sure we get the last section of the show, pairings. Diana, take it away.
All right. Hooray. It's time for pairings. Pairings is the part of the show where I tell you about past episodes you could go check out if you found this one interesting. So lucky for you, we have several past episodes where we have talked about burnout in varying capacities. So I'm going to tell you what those are. They include, in no particular order, episode 129, we talked about staff turnover with Dr. Byron Wine. Episode 199, self-care and modern-day burnout with Dr. Julie Sloviak. Episode 98, supervision and staff burnout. Episode 145, self-care with Dr. Shane Spiker. And episode 267, preventing burnout, which was a listener choice episode. And many of those are for supervision CEs if folks are in need of those, although not all. So check the website for that. And the other part of pairings is I recommend a snack for you to enjoy while you're listening. Today's snack was a turkey sandwich, which is what I was eating during the episode.
I gotta say, Diana, pairings used to have much more thematically appropriate foods. And I think it has increasingly devolved into what did I just eat or what do I want to eat after this is
sometimes,
done?
but I'm not done telling you about my
sorry.
turkey sandwich because I didn't have time to eat it until now. And, Rob wanted to know why was I eating this sandwich during the podcast, but I said I didn't have a break.
Oh.
Had to eat it.
You had to eat it.
Had to eat it on the job. Pairings.
Should onboard you better.
Please enjoy.
All right. Well, again, thanks to Dr. Nicole Gravina for coming on the show. Thanks to you for listening. If you enjoy ABA Inside Track, please think of subscribing on any of the podcast platforms out there. You can also find us online. We're on social medias as ABA Inside Track. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles discussed in this episode, as well as all of our previous episodes. And for even more ABA Inside Track content, including free CEs and discounts, please think of subscribing on our Patreon page, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can subscribe at a number of tiers. But at the $5 tier, you're able to get access to our listener choice polls and video episodes and free CEs for those quarterly listener choice episodes. And at the $10 and up tier, you're able to get our book clubs fresh off the recording stage. We actually have, as of this recording, we will have very soon coming out a Divergent Minds book club. So if you are a patron, you'll be getting that soon. If you're not, well, it'll be coming to the free feed eventually, but you have to wait. And who wants to wait for something that good as our book clubs with book club guy Alan Haberman? We also have our 2025-26 book club poll coming up. So if you have some opinions as to what books we should be doing, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track is the place to go. And of course, you can email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. Some final thanks, big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. And before you go, don't forget that second secret code word. It is Titan, Titan, the parents of the Greek gods in Greek mythology that were banished to Tartarus. Ooh, how smart do I sound there? Again, no, this is another one of Dr. Gravina's cats. Must be a big cat, I guess, or small cat. Who can say with a name like Titan? All right, folks.
He was not pictured.
It was not pictured?
He was not pictured in the
Oh, we did get
chat.
some cat. We did get some cat video on our end. So we'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.